We're here at Murray and Church Streets in Lower Manhattan. You might call this the northern part of, or the southern part of Tribeca. But what I thought I'd do today is tell you about my coming down to Ground Zero 3 days after 9/11 and tell you a little bit about what I saw. Now, I was able to come down here. It was a restricted area below Canal Street where only emergency workers, transit workers could come. But I worked for a government agency at the time, the Metropolitan Transportation Authority, and we had government IDs, and we were allowed to come down here. We'd been stewing in our offices for a couple of days, not able to concentrate on work at all. And I said to my one coworker, Michael, why don't we come down here and see if we can try to help? And there was still a chance that there might still be people alive in the rubble, and we could help volunteer and try to save people. So he said, yeah, let's do that. So we had hard hats and construction type vests and steel-toed boots because of our work, which is involved overseeing construction projects. So we put those on and we came down here over our regular work clothes and came down here, and you had to get off the subway at Canal Street. You couldn't go any further south. So we got off there and we went through various checkpoints where people asked to see our ID, and then we're allowed to proceed. So we probably went through 3 different checkpoints. And we walked down this street, Church Street, towards the area where the World Trade Center stood. And there were various rescue type vehicles, fire trucks, police cars, buses that were outfitted for emergency purposes. And one of the interesting things was this modern building that you see here in front of the current World Trade Center. There was a building about as tall, maybe even taller, and it was part of the collateral damage of the World Trade Center. It was 7 World Trade Center, and it fell. Some people think it was purposely demolished for whatever reason, but it fell, and it fell straight down the street of West Broadway, which is the next street parallel to Church Street, and it laid on its side for blocks. So when you'd walk down Church Street and you'd look over to the west to West Broadway, you'd see this building laying on its side, block after block. It was amazing. So that was one of the first amazing things that we saw. And this is an old church that is used as a sanctuary and a place for people to sleep, emergency workers. And I should mention also the weather on 9/11 was like it is today, which is September 4th, a week before 9/11 of 2020, 19 years after 9/11. But the day we came down on Friday following the Tuesday that was 9/11, it was the first day that it was overcast and rainy, which was really important because it helped keep the dust down and we could really smell it. And we didn't have face masks like everybody has today. But what we did was people had just checked their face masks, the emergency workers and on the street, and so we picked them up and just wore them. We didn't care if, you know, they were dirty or whatever. We had to have some kind of protection. So if you can imagine, this hotel, you see this black building here, the Millennium Hilton. It was here 19 years ago, and a lot of the windows were knocked out, as you might imagine. Maybe shards of steel from the World Trade Center was propelled into the side of the hotel, and also into this historic cemetery. There were just solid shards of steel that just were punctuating the cemetery around the headstones. Just truly amazing. And then right on this corner, where you see the very colorful, it's a temporary structure. They're going to build another building here, the last of the major buildings of the rebuild. But at this corner there were like 3 or 4 shorter buildings that surrounded the World Trade Center. They were like 6, 7, 8 stories tall, and they were still standing, but you have never seen buildings as scorched and totally burnt out as these buildings were. They were just totally fried to a crisp. So you can see a construction crane here. They're still doing work to rebuild the World Trade Center site, and it'll keep going on probably for another 5-10 years by the time they build this last building. What they're building right now is a performing arts center next to the current World Trade Center. So we walked around the pile, and I should also mention here there was another stark scene I saw. So there were a lot of fire departments and emergency workers that came from all over the world, and God bless them. It was really heartening to see everybody coming to help out. But what was disheartening to see was there were a couple of fire departments from California, and I want to say Sacramento was one of them. Anyway, they were having a group picture taken right at this corner as we walked by, and they were all smiling. And I just thought it was so weird to be smiling and sort of laughing as you're having your group picture taken, with the utter devastation in the backdrop. Just weird. I mean, there's pictures out there that you've never seen them in a newspaper, but we saw them being taken. And there's this old cemetery you see across the street. And so we walked down around the site. We were trying to see where to get in to help. So like this was the whole site over here, and where those trees are, where the World Trade Center building stood. I'll get to that as we walk around. And this train station is the new train station. This wasn't here naturally. There was an entrance. It's an entrance to the Path subway. That's all it is. And it cost $8 billion, and it looks like a giant stegosaurus, but and they have a lot of high-end stores that are currently closed due to the pandemic because it's an indoor mall with no outdoor access. So we walked around and we went over to Broadway. I'll stay on Church just for to keep this concise. But we walked down Broadway, and it was no people were allowed in this Lower Manhattan, and except for emergency workers. As we walked further away, we were the only people in Lower Manhattan, and we were walking down the middle of Broadway, and it was like abandoned city. It was like something out of the Twilight Zone. And there's a quietness to the city, and we looked in some windows. There was one donut shop, and all the donuts in the window had about 2 inches of soot on each donut. It was amazing. So that was another visual. I also want to step back and mention that Century 21 is a store I went into the night before 9/11. I was downtown and I was coming back up from a meeting, and I was at the end of the day on September 10th, and I wanted to buy a pair of jeans. And there was a underground shopping center like there is now at the World Trade Center, only it was more, it included stores like the Gap and other regular stores, not high-end like it is now. And I didn't really want to go in to look for jeans in the World Trade Center underground mall. I didn't really like the old World Trade Center, and but I went in. There was no other stores I could find, and I went into the Gap. And when I got down there, this is like 5:30, 6 o'clock the night before 9/11, I had this feeling of impending doom. Maybe it was because there once was another terrorist attack where several people were killed, and there was a lot of smoke damage to the existing towers several years before. And I got this uneasy feeling, so I said, I got to get out of here. I just feel like something's going to happen again. It's the only time I've ever felt this in my entire life, but I felt it really strongly. And so I came up the escalator, and I go, well, let me go across the street to Century 21, which was here, and go in there. So I went in there to Century 21, and I got to the jeans section, and maybe there was a line, or maybe there were a lot of people or whatever, but I felt like, you know what? I still feel like I'm too close. I still get this overall feeling of dread, like something's gonna happen. And so I left Century 21, and I ultimately took a subway uptown to Macy's at 34th Street, and that's where I finally bought a couple of pairs of jeans. I think I still have them. I call them my 9/11 jeans. They're 19-year-old jeans. I never wear them anymore, but for some reason I've never thrown them out. Still kept them. And so that was my experience the night before. I had this feeling, and it sounds made up, but it's true. This brown building here was here. It was the Merrill Lynch building. I don't know whatever happened to Merrill Lynch brokerage. They were bought by somebody else, but who would have thought that? But the heat was so intense on this building that several of the girders going across were crumpled, wrinkled, and they had to be replaced. And I'm sure they had to check out the structural integrity of the whole building. But it just shows you the intensity of everything. So we walked down Broadway, and then we came back around, and now we're outside of one of the new towers. It's built on the site of the old World Trade Center. I forget what numbers. They're numbered like 1 through 4. I think 2 is the one that's missing, but it doesn't say specifically what number this is. But so we came back around this corner. So this is Liberty Street, and one of the things we noticed was there were a lot of fire engines. A lot of firemen were killed, and a lot of the fire engines that they arrived in were crushed by the falling buildings. And when I mean crushed, they were made to be as flat as a pancake. You picture a fire truck and then picture it being only 3 feet tall because it's so smashed. Anyway, what they had done in the 2 or 3 days since 9/11 is they had stacked them in a pile. There might have been like 10 fire trucks stacked on top of each other, all crushed. And so like it might have been a 30-foot high pile, but it was 10 fire trucks. And there was a guy who's driving a flatbed truck with another crushed fire engine on the back of his flatbed, and he called out to us. He goes, "Hey, do you know where I'm supposed to put this?" We didn't know. We were just walking around. We were getting our bearings, but I guess we looked like we knew what we were doing. So I saw the pile. I go, "Oh yeah, put it over there on the pile of the other fire engines." He goes, "Oh, okay." So I mean, everybody was just flying by the seat of their pants. And around here, this is the site of the former buildings, which is very meaningful. I don't know if you can get in there and actually walk around. It might be restricted. I see a lot of barricades set up. We'll walk close. This is a church, a Greek Orthodox church that was damaged during 9/11, and they're still rebuilding it. It had stopped for a while. They had money problems. They had cost overruns. But I heard that they're rebuilding it, and they've gotten going again. So that's happening. St. Nicholas National Shrine. And some of these buildings are new. The W Hotel is new. I remember that was being built. It might have been in progress after 9/11, or maybe it was several years later. Anyway, I remember they were building it, and there was hardly anybody downtown to go to it. Then there was, now there isn't again, because it's pretty desolate down here. But so we finally walked around the site, and where we got in, or where we got in a line, was on the other side of what are now reflecting pools, where the buildings once stood. But this was just a huge pile of mangled metal and smoke rising up from it, and totally bad smell, you know, that later people who were exposed to it for a long time were affected by it, and a lot of people came down with cancer, and there's been a whole victim fund set up to compensate the families of the firemen and other emergency workers, construction workers. A lot of construction workers were here to help sort through and remove rubble carefully and try to save someone. I don't think they found anybody alive after all that huge effort. Days and days. They would stop everything when they found a body and remove it and try to do it in a very respectful way. But that was pretty disappointing that they couldn't find survivors. And by the way, this ball here it's like a jagged thing. It was here and it was damaged. It was an artwork, and it was damaged during the event, and they've kept it here as a reminder of what happened. So when this first opened to the public, you had to have tickets. They were really careful about checking your bags and everything. At first it was just open for the family members. People's names, all the victims' names are along the edge of the two reflecting pools, one for each building, that are in the outline of each of the former towers. And this map here shows you the two towers, the South Tower and the North Tower. And then they've also built a 9/11 Memorial Museum you can sort of see it's kind of the building with a sloped roof, unusual shape. And I've heard it's excellent. I've never been into it, but we keep meaning to go to it. But so I'll finish the story. So we got around to where all the construction workers and firemen and police were lining up to go into the pile. And I should add, the President Bush at the time was coming to the site. We'd heard he was coming, and he was going to be coming with the governor. And when we were here, we saw the helicopter. Maybe there were a couple of helicopters flying overhead. They were getting an aerial look before they landed. And my coworker and I, we both had kids that were in either daycare or after school programs. And we felt like if we went in and we either got in and did some work quickly and then left to go get our kids, or we'd be stuck, because we felt like they would really clamp down the security if the president was here. And I wasn't too crazy about, I felt like Mayor Giuliani really had stepped up and was calming everybody's fears, and the President Bush had taken his time getting here. When he did get here, he said some encouraging words, and so that was nice. But I mean, it was 3 days after it happened. So, and by the way, a lot of these buildings were here, and including in Battery Park City, some of the apartment buildings, and a lot of windows were blown out. And some of the emergency workers, they just moved into people's apartments because everybody fled, and they just used people's apartments to sleep in while they were working here. It was kind of a benevolent break-in, I don't know, but I guess it all got sorted out afterwards. One other visual I'll mention is we walked along the river, along the promenade, along the Hudson River, on our way back to the pile, to ground zero here. And along the river, one of the things you couldn't get over were there were all these baby carriages that were just abandoned. It's like when everything happened, the nannies or the mothers or fathers grabbed their kids out of the baby carriages and just ran. Everybody ran, and they left those baby carriages behind. So they were all sitting around askew all over the promenade. It was just really weird to see. So anyway, we finally got over to the line of workers going into the site, and we moved up, and we're wearing our hard hats and our vests, and our office clothes, which was probably the giveaway that we were not regular construction workers. We were wearing shirts with collars. Anyway, we got up to the front of the line, and it was like a fire marshal, an officer who was letting people go in and taking people's names and numbers and stuff like that. And we got up to the front, and he said, "No, you're not going in to the hole." And I said, "Well, we want to help, you know, that's why we're here." And they go, "No, only construction workers and firemen." You know, like, so they turned us away. But in retrospect, I was kind of glad, because if we had gone in and worked and inhaled all those fumes with our flimsy little masks, they weren't N95s, they were just whatever surgical masks were on the street, probably would not have been good for us health-wise long term. So with that, we left, and so there's a lot of pictures of what I've described. I'm sure they're out there, but the public has never seen them. Pictures of scattered baby carriages and fire trucks squished to the thickness of a tin can stacked up in a huge pile. One other visual I remember is, some of the firemen were working non-stop for 48, 72 hours, and some of them, I saw this one fireman sitting on a folding chair right out in the middle of the plaza area around the ground zero, and he was totally knocked out, dead asleep, mouth wide open, arms back, the most uncomfortable sleeping position you've ever seen, but he was dead out asleep. I mean, he could have had a brother, a fellow fireman who had been lost, and he had been doing everything he possibly could to try to save people and find people. So I'll never forget, and we should all never forget 9/11, even though it's been 19 years since then. Next year will mark 20 years since the event, terrible event. One other story I'll add is when I was living in White Plains, New York at the time, and I was living in an apartment building, and I saw some article that said there were like 5 people from our town that were killed in 9/11, and one of the people that was listed lived on my street. It happened to be Martine Avenue. So I was just mentioning that to the doorman of the building, that I read that one of the victims who died lived on Martine Avenue, same street. And he goes, "Oh yeah, she lived in this building." I go, "Really?" And I lived on the 2nd floor at the time. I asked, "What floor did she live on?" She lived on the 2nd floor, same as me. And it turned out it was my next door neighbor. And I might have seen her once or twice coming and going, but she had perished here at the World Trade Center. So I bought an American flag, a short American flag, and put it by her door. And I later actually met her parents at a ceremony where White Plains had a monument to the 5 people from White Plains who had died. And I told them the story about how she was my next door neighbor. So there's a lot of stories people have. I could tell more stories of people I knew who were in the towers and got out. Okay, I'll tell 2 quick stories. One was of a woman who worked for the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey, and she was way up in the 80th floor of Tower 1, the North Tower, and they got the word they should all get out of the building. So everybody was using the stairwells all the way down from the 80s. And by the way, people on the top floors, due to how the plane crashed, they couldn't get out, so they were stuck and they all perished. Like people who worked for the firm Cantor Fitzgerald, very unfortunate. 100 to 200 people from that company alone died. And so anyway, she was on one of the highest floors where you could still get out. So they were racing down the stairs, and she ran out of her office so fast she didn't have her shoes on. So she was in her stockings. And by the way, she had a couple of small children at home, and her husband worked elsewhere in Manhattan. And so she was just going to try to get to her husband and then get home to her kids. So she was they're all trying to get out before anything terrible happens. So they're racing down the stairs, but they're being slowed down because somebody from one of the floors was bringing their set of golf clubs with them, and that was slowing everybody down. So that was an amazing story. And the other story I have is someone I once knew who worked in Tower 2, also on one of the very high up floors, 70 or 80th. And they were all, each of the buildings were 100 stories tall, so they were in the 70s or 80s. And they heard the announcement over the public address system that people should stay in the building. And he was with 3 other guys, and they only had one stairwell to use. The other 3 had been crushed and were impassable or whatever. And so the 4 of them looked at each other like, what should we do? Should we obey this direction over the public address or go against what they were saying? So 2 of the guys elected to stay, and the other 2, including this guy I knew, they said, no, we're going. And they ran down all the stairs. So they survived, and the other 2 did not survive. So those are just some stories. There's many more stories. And I just wanted to help paint a picture of what it was like here 19 years ago as we approach another sad anniversary of 9/11 here in Lower Manhattan. Thanks for joining me.